The oldest and strongest human emotion is fear. And the oldest and strongest type of fear is trepidation of the unknown. When we were children, our parents told us that monsters didn't exist. But we were sure that something was lurking under the bed or in the closet. Fear sees even if our eyes are closed. Welcome to the realm of the arcane. My name is Lon Strickler. Join me as I examine unexplained creatures, strange manifestations, and remarkable realities. Imagine this next hour as a voyage of discovery to strange lands, seeking not for new territory, but for new knowledge of the supernatural. Come on board as we begin this adventure together. Hey folks, good evening and welcome to another episode of Arcane Radio. I'm your host Lon Strickler and I thank you for joining me here on the Paranormal King Radio Network. Listeners can show their support for Arcane Radio by becoming a patron. Simply go to phantomsandmonsters.com and click the Podbean patron banner. Now before I introduce my guest, I want to mention two Upright Canine accounts I recently became aware of. The one came to me directly from Texas. The witness stated, I'm 56 years old and have been in Southeast Texas most of my life. Raised in the swamp and experienced hunter. At 16 or 17, I was in Vidor, Texas, throwing football in a secluded area with a friend. 20 feet from us, a wolf-like creature came out of the wooded area onto the road. I asked my friend if he thought it was a wolf. There were no wolves in that area at the time. The creature heard me and stood up and started leering at us. It took 3 to 4 steps toward us. My observation was it was about 5 foot tall and a long snout and very large canine teeth with eyes that were like a dog's, that were not like a dog's. My friend had already abandoned me and locked himself inside the car. I yelled something in fear and it ran across the road and went back to a 4-legged stance and disappeared into the forest. I've never seen any strange things before, and after I get ridiculed for telling this, but now I know what I saw. Thanks for your website. Now, I wasn't able to get a hold of this witness, though he did send a small note stating that everything I had posted was true, and I tried to get a date. I think he did tell me the early 2000s, so I don't know exactly when it was or where it was, but I do know it was Southeast Texas, which of course that part of South Texas is very heavy in anomalies, all kinds of stuff, UFOs, all Bigfoot, all kinds of different things. So it doesn't surprise me it came from that area. Now, another one I found was from Wise River, Montana, in the summer of 2015. The witness stated, I live alone in this remote location. Now, we didn't have cable, so the only option is satellite TV. It was a humid summer night in July, and the TV was acting up, so I needed to go out and adjust the satellite like usual. I took a flashlight and a gun with me. When I went outside, it was unusually quiet, so silent it was unnerving. I brushed the thought off and went to the dish, which is in the corner of my yard. I went to work, making sure all the wires were all right and pointing in a different angle. Suddenly, I heard a small snap of a stick to my left and turned the flashlight in a direction, and I saw a creature standing there. I got a good look at it, but for what seemed like an eternity, but it was only for about 10 seconds. I slowly backed off and ran back to the house and locked all the doors and windows. Now, the creature was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. When I shined a light at it, the first thing I saw was the head. It had cropped ears that pointed upwards. Its snout was narrower than a bear's and longer, and I could make out large teeth protruding from the jaw. Its eyes were deep red shade that seemed to reflect off the light I was pointing at it. The body was muscular and huge. It had long arms that appeared to be longer than its legs, broad shoulders that tapered into a skinnier waist. It was slightly crouched over when I saw it, with one hand wrapped around a small tree. I could make out the legs were similar to that of a dog's legs. It was obvious hocked. Even at that crouched position, it was my height, which is 6 foot. Standing up the full height, this creature could easily have been 7.5 foot tall. The fur was black and thicker around the neck and chest, and the bottom half significantly less so. I don't know if it was aggressive or not. What I know is I had a feeling of dread unlike anything I've ever experienced. Was it just observing me or stalking me? For a creature this large, it was deceivingly silent. It got within 15 yards of me without me noticing. All I knew was I needed to get out of there and not find out. I don't live on the property anymore, but after the event, I had never had another face-to-face encounter. But I would hear sounds in the woods I couldn't explain. They would start off relatively quiet and work their way up to a furious howls and screams, then back down to quiet again. I don't know if it was the same thing, but it could have been the local wildlife. So this is a similar type of account we get with these upright canines. Of course, last week we talked to Linda Godfrey about the Bray Road beast and some of the accounts she's had over the years. So this was out in the western part of the country, and there are slight variations throughout the country and into Canada, but quite frankly, most of the descriptions are fairly similar. So let's get started with tonight. Tonight's guest, Stan Gordon, is a colleague and a UFO and Anomalies investigator in Pennsylvania. Stan began his interest in UFO subject and other strange incidents at the age of 10 in 1959. He began in the field investigations of UFOs and other mysterious events in 1965, and the primary investigator of the December night 1965 UFO crash recovery incident that occurred near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. Stan is a former Pennsylvania state director for MUFON and has been involved with the investigation of thousands of mysterious encounters throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. His 3 books, Really Mysterious Pennsylvania, Silent Invasion, the Pennsylvania UFO Bigfoot Casebook, and Astonishing Encounters, Pennsylvania Unknown Creatures, are the culmination of his extensive field research. Stan was recently featured in the documentary film Invasion on the Chestnut Ridge. His website can be found at www.stangordon.info. So Stan, thanks for joining me.
Oh, Juan, thanks for having me back on the program.
Well, let's get right into it. You've been getting a lot of reports, a lot of weird things in Pennsylvania this year. It's been quite busy. Can you describe the incident that took place on July 14th at a family picnic in a rural area just outside of Pittsburgh?
Yeah, that is an interesting report among a number of other reports we've been getting now for months of a lot of unusual activity. But this was interesting because this involved multiple family witnesses having a picnic outside of in the Pittsburgh area. And I had been contacted by one of the relatives that what had taken place, and I was able to do initially an interview and interviewed several of the different family members by phone, and they sounded not only sincere but very, very shook up that something seemed to have actually happened. And Dave and Cindy Drageson, 2 other Bigfoot researchers, which was close to that area, and Dave became pretty well known over the years as a Bigfoot eyewitness forensic artist who has gone out and sketched various creatures from what the witnesses described. So they were able to meet with the family members, go to the scene of the incident, and it was a pretty interesting account. And so there were 9 family members involved, and they had a large dog with them. And they were preparing to spend most of the day out in this area to have fun and play music and cook a lot of food on the grill. And so everything was pretty good until later that evening. as they're cooking a lot of meat, and their music's up, and the kids are all dancing around, when the dog became very agitated. And there was something apparently moving around in the woods, in the nearby woods. The dog began to growl and bark in a rather agitated manner. And whatever it was moving from east to south in a perimeter around where they were. And about 15 to 20 yards away, one of the people at the scene noticed there was something, and the dog was, again, growling louder and louder and more intense. And this man noticed this form in the shadows of the trees, and it was lit up pretty well by the campfire, from the light from a large campfire. And what he said he saw was a very large, hairy, humanoid-like creature, around 8 feet tall, appeared to be very muscular, very massive, with broad shoulders and covered with long, dark hair. And he said he was looking at this thing, and actually he could hear it breathing very heavily, and he could see its huge chest moving in and out as it was breathing. And he said he became very, very shook up at the time, mainly, I guess, from the size of the creature, and the fact that it had what appeared to be glowing red eyes. And he only observed it for, he guessed, maybe about 10 to 15 seconds as it moved off into the woods. Apparently another one of the witnesses saw it move off as well. But others heard the loud sound, and they said when this thing was stepping, as bipedal, as it was hitting the ground, they said it actually was shaking. I mean, you could feel the thump as it was hitting the ground, which I've heard in other cases over the years. And it's a very, very interesting case. If you go to my website, stangordon.info, the reports on there, and the sketch that Dave Dragosin drew from the eyewitness accounts is on there. Now, we've talked in the past about some of the strange aspects of Bigfoot that I've looked into over the years, and going back to my Solid Invasion book back to 1973 and 74, when we began to notice some very strange incidents with both UFOs and Bigfoot seen together, or in some cases we first began to notice a pattern back then where, for example, we'd have a Bigfoot sighting in a particular area, and within minutes, hours, or days later, we would have a UFO sighting, or vice versa. Well, this is kind of interesting with this particular case, because it was when, within the hour before this incident happened, only very few miles away, I had a report from a suburb of Pittsburgh, a business area of Pittsburgh, of this object that was hovering about 100 feet off the ground, and suddenly it moved off across the sky and disappeared. And then, interestingly, this incident was later reported not far away in the same evening within the hour. And then we had another incident earlier this year. This would have been, I believe it was May 14th. And this is outside of Pittsburgh. This would be down in Greene County. And it was during the afternoon. And the witness had just gone to close a window because there was a storm approaching. And as she looked out the window, she noticed this dark, hat-like, saucer-shaped object that appeared to be hovering about 150 feet away over the neighbor's home. The object appeared to be dark, but not quite black, maybe 20, 25 feet in length, about 8 to 10 feet high. Didn't see any windows or lights, and didn't make any sound. And there seemed to be possibly kind of yellow or gold markings towards the top of the object. And as the witness watched, the object banked, moved off into the sky towards the southeast, and then was lost from sight. So, again, what's interesting, again, maybe just a coincidence, but it was 2 days later, not that far from that location, in the afternoon, that a person was driving their vehicle on a rural road between Washington and Greene County when they noticed there was a truck pulled off to the side of the road, and there was a person in the truck, and there was a person standing by the truck, and they were pointing towards the hillside about 50 yards away. So this person stopped and looked up to see what they were looking at, and they watched this large creature, about 6.5 to 7 feet tall from the distance they were, the estimate of that height, that was covered with hair and kind of a dark brown or black hair color. Couldn't sure. The arms were long, hung down to its side, walked upright on 2 legs, and they couldn't see a lot of facial feature, but they were able to see there was no muzzle, and it was certain it was not a bear. And it stepped out of the wood line about 4 to 5 steps, then turned around and walked back into the wood line and was gone. So kind of interesting. You have these two type of reports, and there was some similarity there. So that's just an example of some of the things that have been going on around western Pennsylvania.
Now, that was in Greene County?
That's correct.
Yeah, well, you know, historically, Greene County and Washington County have had a lot of weird sightings over the years.
Yeah, I've been involved in many of them over the years, that's for sure.
Yeah, I've gotten some strange stories out of there, and they're just not the run-of-the-mill sightings. I mean, there's always seems to be something else involved with it. But then, of course, you know, you're used to that. So, now you and Eric Altman were involved with an investigation in Armstrong County as well.
Yeah, there's been a lot of reports. I mean, there's been reports coming all year, and I do receive reports generally all year round, you know, from many locations. This year, though, has been pretty interesting, pretty steady with reports coming in. And I'm just trying to go back and review some of the reports here, but a lot during, it seems to be probably around May, June. It seems like we started to get widespread reports from many different areas of people describing these strange screams and howls coming from wooded areas, and it was unlike anything they had ever heard before. Now, some of these people that I talked with, and a couple of cases Eric and I went out, some of these people were very familiar with animal sounds. They were either experienced hunters or outdoorsmen, and they all said they had never heard anything like it before. I know in the one case we were out there, and they said that when these things started screaming, that all the normal nature sounds would suddenly just go dead quiet. All the frogs and all the normal sounds in the area would just get completely quiet, which is very common with a lot of these type of reports. But it's interesting from the widespread area of so many different reports coming in of people describing the same thing. There have also been other alleged Bigfoot sightings being reported. Now, some of these people I have interviewed. Other cases, people are calling me because they have friends or neighbors who have seen these things, but the witnesses are reluctant to come forward, which, you know, is something we run into quite often. And but there seems to be something going on out there. And but Eric and I, yes, we're up in Armstrong County, and up in an area which has a lot of history of Bigfoot sightings going back, at least for myself, going back to at least, I think probably the late 70s, early, maybe even earlier than that, for sure late 70s, early 80s. There have been a number of reports in more recent years up in that general area, and we went out to a particular property where there's been a history of sighting and screams and other things being reported. But the people are also reporting in beautiful weather, sounds like trees breaking and cracking, and we went out pretty deep into some very, very thickly wooded areas. And in fact, I have a picture of one of these trees on my website that people can take a look at. And it was pretty, Eric and I, we both looked at this thing. It was very interesting because you have healthy trees, young healthy trees, 9-10 feet off the ground that appear to be broken and twisted. And I've seen a lot of weather damage, related damage over the years, and it just couldn't see anything else in the area that even fit. And so we're not saying it was Bigfoot, we don't know, but it's quite interesting what we were seeing. And another location in Westmoreland County, which again has a lot of history of Bigfoot activity and other cryptid reports as well, another person had called us out because of the screams they've been hearing, and others within miles they've been reporting similar type of reports. And in that particular case, again, we were looking through the wooded areas, and it wasn't far from this one person's residence that he found what appeared to be a large flattened area. Now, we've seen deer lay areas before. This looked different. And this was, as I recall, maybe about 8 feet long or so. And when we got there, it was probably about a week after he had actually found it. And so it was still flattened, interestingly, but he said it was much flatter, much more distinct when he had seen it. He had been an experienced hunter, very experienced hunter, and he thought it was very, very unusual. So some things are going on out there. And then probably one of the most interesting reports, not Bigfoot, is something else we've seen recently. Again, you know, we talk about the Chestnut Ridge. We've talked about it in the past. And the Chestnut Ridge continues, especially in this area of southwest PA, out in this area, Westmoreland County, continues to be a very active area year after year for UFO sightings, Bigfoot encounters, other cryptid reports, mystery booms, underground sounds, all kind of weird phenomena. And we had a really interesting report come in, and this was just in the last couple of weeks. And this is an area, by the way, it has a lot of history of Bigfoot activity. I've been out there many, many days and nights since the 70s investigating reports, but this was September 10th of this year. And this was a rural road in Derry Township, so you're along the Chestnut Ridge, at the base of the ridge, not far from there. It was a rainy night. We had a lot of heavy rains in this area at the time, and it was starting to slow down. It was a rainy night, and his headlight caught something about 75 feet ahead of him, and he said it just seemed to appear out of nowhere. He said it was already in the middle of the road when he saw it moving from left to right. And he said it was very hard to describe, but he said this being, he first thought it was fog, but he looked all around everywhere else. There was no other fog or no misty other conditions around the area, but this thing had a humanoid shape. And he said it was hard to describe, but it was humanoid form that was foggy or misty in appearance. He stated it was a foggy white form, about 6.5 to 7 feet tall. It appeared to be somewhat stooped over as it moved, and it said it gave the impression that it just wasn't moving right. And he said as this thing moved, he said he could see it had huge muscular shoulders and a small waist. He really couldn't clearly see the head, and the arms and the legs were not clearly discernible, but he said as it moved, he saw it from its left side, and he said it crossed the road and entered into a field, and then it just seemed to just suddenly vanish. But he said he couldn't see feet, and he hesitated to say this, but he said it moved almost like it floated. But he said he didn't hear any sound, didn't smell anything, and he said, I just don't know what I saw. And, of course, over the years, I've had other reports of various type of entities that are gliding or floating across fields or across roadways. And so it's another one of those strange stories from out along the base of the Chestnut Ridge.
Well, I've been looking into these humanoid sightings out in Mount Vernon, Ohio. And, we've had the same thing in Pennsylvania, very similar in Pennsylvania as well.
Oh, yeah. And, of course, the one case I looked into last year, and that's kind of when it began here, was this incident involving a police officer. This was late August of last year. And this was in a very wooded rural location in southwest PA, Westmoreland County. And this officer was on patrol, and ahead of him, he observed what appeared to be a ball of very dull white light low to the ground. Now, he patrolled the area all the time, and he didn't remember any type of artificial lighting or anything like that in the area. So he slowed down, and he stopped a distance away, and he said suddenly this round light suddenly rose up or stood up from the ground. And it was at that point he realized he was seeing something very strange. He said to me, this is the weirdest thing he'd ever seen. He said the ball of light was actually the head of a very strange being that looked to be about 6 feet tall or larger. It was tall and almost skeletal thin. And he said he was in the opinion that when he first observed it had been lying on its belly on the ground with its head facing towards the road. It then stood up facing the road, and in that dark location he saw the dull light from the glowing head illuminating the upper part of the body. Now, he said the officer said it turned to the right. The dull illumination from the head lit up the shoulder area. The creature turned and faced him, then turned to the left and took off at an incredible speed towards the location away from the road. He said as it moved off, he could see its arms swinging. He said it took off at a speed you could only call abnormal. It was faster than anything he'd ever seen before. It was there and then was gone. And that's interesting because that's the same thing various other cryptid witnesses have told and mentioned to me. And he said the creature, he assumed that it moved on two legs. However, he could not see the lower section of the body in the dark. He said, again, it's maybe 6 feet tall, 6 feet or taller. The head was about 8 to 10 inches diameter, shaped like a ball. He said the head was just a ball of light, possibly egg-shaped, but pretty round. The light emitted seemed to be very dull white. The light illuminated the shoulders, the top of the chest, and a section of the arms. He could not see the hands. The chest looked to be about 18 inches across. The waist appeared to be small, but the arms were abnormally long. The long limbs also looked skeletal with no muscle mass. The skin tone appeared to be dull grayish blue. He could not see any facial features. After the creature took off, he pulled his patrol car up, put on the spotlight, looked around, but saw no evidence on the ground. And then it was, and again, I'm going from memory. I don't have all the reports in front of me, right. But it was several weeks later that I received another report, only miles away from where the officer saw this thing. This person only reported this because she told a friend or neighbor, and she encouraged this person to call me. And she was out that evening walking down her rural road when suddenly this thing came out of the woods. As I recall, it came as close about 35 feet away from her, and she described it very, very similarly, except the head was not glowing. And then you had that report outside of Pittsburgh.
Right.
I think it was from Allison Park, if I recall, of something somewhat similar, even though the description was similar, the coloring was a little different. And then I got another report, that was in February, I believe, of this year, that you received that. And then in February this year, I also received another report from another part of rural, I believe Westmoreland County, early morning hours, where a person saw a very similar, very tall, thin creature taking big strides across the field, and I believe it jumped or cleared a very high fence and continued on. So it's interesting, and we're hearing other anonymous reports from around this area almost since the beginning of the year of something tall and thin and white that's being seen.
Yeah.
But we haven't been able to track down any of the witnesses so far.
You know, that's something that has been really showing up a lot lately. In particular for us, we were getting these reports in Cambria County, just at a reservoir just north of Portage, where we had 5 different reports of a white being. Now, the first report was actually described as a tall, white canine, biped. And I had another one later that was very similar, but then I had others along the lake where people were describing a more humanoid type of being, anywhere from 5 to 6 foot in height, some thin, some a little bigger, but very white. And also seen in the dark on some occasions. You know, you talked about that one in Allison Park. Now, that was almost like a shadow figure, though it was more distinct than the shadow figure. It had defined lines to it. But, you know, I can't really say it was like a Bigfoot or anything like that.
Oh, no. And the other reports we had, like from the police side, that was not a Bigfoot at all. I mean, These are something completely different. A Bigfoot, these things are hairless.
Bizarre, really bizarre. We now, you know, as far as upright canines, now, you know, of course, we had Butch and I were receiving those sightings in central Pennsylvania about 2 years ago. Then it kind of waned off for a while, but we have had 3 distinct sightings this year so far in Pennsylvania, and I don't know if it's starting to pick up or not, but you know, it was nothing like it was 2 years ago. Have you been getting any upright canine reports?
I've heard some secondhand. I've heard of some reports from the last year from different areas. Some of these came from people who are close to witnesses, but people who don't want to come forward, but they're giving me some pretty interesting accounts. I'm hearing other reports, possibly in Southwest PA, that type of thing going on. But, you know, Lon, these reports, I mean, what they're calling the Dogman reports now, I mean, they may have been around for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you go back and reread my Silent Invasion book, you know, that was, as far as I am aware, that was the biggest Bigfoot outbreak ever documented in the country, and went on for weeks and months, you know, from the summer of 73 and the 74.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, it went on, and there were multitudes of reports. And many of those sightings were in daylight at very, very close range, and many of the sightings, even in recent years, are in daylight around here. You know, you look at some of these TV shows, and they kind of suggest that a lot of the Bigfoot sightings are only a nocturnal event, and many of the best Bigfoot sightings we looked into were in daylight.
Oh, absolutely.
And in some of these cases, witnesses, I mean, when I say close range, I'm telling you, some of these people, some incidents were within feet. I mean, within 5, 10, 15 feet away, where they were very close to structures, walked out in front of vehicles. But if you look at some of those reports in 73, I mean, many of those were your so-called typical Bigfoot reports, 6 to 9 feet tall, very long arms below the knees, almost to the ground, covered with long, dark hair, no neck in many cases. Sometimes he had that terrible odor. Sometimes there was no smell at all, which continues today. You don't always have an odor. But some of those reports, there was some variation. Some of those creatures were more muscular. Some were taller and thinner. And then there was a small group of reports where people were extremely close. I mean, within feet of seeing some of these creatures. They were able to give us a detailed description of the facial features. And some of them described them as, the creature was covered with hair, but the face was more wolf-like. They had big, prominent fang-like teeth. They had luminous, glowing eyes. And in some cases, they went down, they were walking upright, but they went down on all fours.
Right.
So these reports may have been going on for a long, long time. Is it a completely separate creature? Is it another variation of Bigfoot? Who knows?
Well, I think a lot of the so-called Bigfoot sightings may actually be upright canines. I mean, vice versa. I think some people see them at a distance and really don't know what they're looking at. But you're right. These upright canine dogman sightings in Pennsylvania have been going on for a long time. We've had, I've had historical sightings that I've found from back in the mid-1800s. And, of course, down in Maryland, just south of the Pennsylvania line into Frederick County, they had a flat down there back in the 70s where there were at least 7 encounters. So this is not new. It seems that stretching from Pennsylvania through the valleys of the Appalachia and down into the South Mountains into Blue Ridge, there seems to be a byway there somewhere. Like they may move from West Virginia, Maryland into Pennsylvania and back and forth. I mean, they may actually be migrators.
Well, Juan, I'll tell you, it's so fascinating. In the last several years, we're getting more and more various type of cryptid reports in. And, for years and years, we have the typical reports, I would say. The ones you get pretty commonly, you get the Bigfoot sightings, you get the Thunderbird reports, you get the Black Panther sightings, you get other type of entities, but we're getting more and more other types of weird creature reports coming in. And, I have this program I do, and I don't know if you've ever seen it or not. I'll probably be giving it next year at Eric's Bigfoot camping adventure when he's going to have it up in Fayette County next year. I know you're going to be there, and I'll be there speaking. Yeah, and it's called Strange Aspects of Elusive Bigfoot. And it gets into so many of the very bizarre aspects of Bigfoot that I've uncovered over the last 40-some years, which highly suggests that there's more to Bigfoot than just a flesh and blood explanation, which may well be why there's no bodies ever being found. And, one thing I bring up is the footprint mystery in itself. And across the country and in Pennsylvania, and a lot of researchers don't bring it up, and some do, but it's another part of the mystery. We've all seen the typical 5-toed footprints. Mm-hmm. But in many parts of the country and around the world, in the Pacific Northwest and in Oregon and Canada and other areas, where you have the typical 5-toed tracks, not uncommon to receive reports of 3-toed and even 4-toed tracks. The same thing is here in Pennsylvania and along the East Coast. It's been going on for years and years. Mm-hmm. How could, it's hard enough to believe that for so many years you can have one type of unknown primate running around and nobody ever finding one. If these are legitimate tracks, and sure, I've seen hoax tracks, but I've also seen many, many other tracks that appear to be legitimate. The witnesses are very sincere. There was other data that suggested there was something real happening out there. How can you have so many different types of tracks showing up? How can you have so many types of unknown different species out there? It just doesn't make any sense. There's got to be something else involved. Yeah,
we got a question in the chat room about how we separate the serious reports from pranks. Well, it's interesting, and I know you feel the same way. A lot of these people that we have dealt with in this area or in Pennsylvania in general, when they report it, they really believe they have seen something, and a lot of times the evidence in the account really match up to something serious.
Oh, no doubt. And, reflecting back again to the 70s, 1973, and that's when I had my first research group of a lot of scientists and engineers and research people, and we were responding to incidents 24 hours a day around our jobs. Yeah. So we were on the scene, and back in those days, even the police investigated some of the cases. Either our teams or the police would be on the scene within minutes to hours. So we're documenting all this as it's happening. I mean, you could go out there and see the emotions and the fright in the eyes of the witnesses. You can see how the animals are reacting, and that's something that keeps showing up all the time. And I said for years and years, you can fool people, but you can't fool the animals. And to see normally vicious, ferocious dogs just cowering and not even moving and not barking, I mean, after a Bigfoot had been right near them, I mean, that's something you can't fabricate. So, in so many of those cases, we're on the scene. We see the physical evidence there. You see the animal reactions. You're interviewing the people. You see the emotional response of the witnesses. And even today, I get many reports like you do. And so many of these people call me, and they're from all walks of life. Many of them are professional people. Some were experienced hunters who never believed that these kind of creatures could exist till they had their own personal encounter. And I'm telling you, so many of these people, they had and they have very difficult times dealing with some of these cases. I mean, some of these witnesses from 30, 40 years ago, I'm still in touch with. And some of these people, their lives have been changed because of what they saw, and they couldn't believe what they saw.
Yeah, you're right. It's interesting, the report that you had forwarded to me from Lakewood, Colorado, the dog man report, from about 3 years ago. You remember that. That witness, amazing witness, professional guy. I mean, great description. He was an artist. He did an actual sketch of it. I was lucky enough to have Jack Carey and J.C. Johnson right down the street from this guy at the time, which was wild. They were over there the next day. And Jack has actually caught some footage of something that looks like an upright canine running. It was something that he caught when he was being filmed running from behind him. So that area, something's going on around there. But, I just want to let everybody know that you're the one who sent that report came into you originally, and then you sent it off to me. That was one of the more interesting upright canine reports I've ever had.
Yeah, there's some amazing accounts out there. It's just amazing what goes on all the time, and just the reports that we hear about. And I do a lot of lectures, and I go to a lot of different places, and everywhere I go, people are coming up and sharing their accounts or accounts they know about. I mean, it's just continuous everywhere. Can you just imagine how much of this is really going on out there that we don't know about?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, what kind of percentage do you think we actually get of what people are actually seeing? I would say it'd be less than 5%.
Yeah, it's probably small.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just everywhere you go. I mean, there's probably not a place in Pennsylvania that over the years hasn't had some kind of incident. Some places have continuous incidents or a large number of reports. And, if you look at some of the reports of where they're coming in from, in more recent years, you're getting more and more reports in more populated areas, not so much just the wooded areas, but other areas where there's maybe some woods around, but not a lot. It's more of people and homes. And again, that just adds more and more to the mystery. Where do they hide? Where do they come from? And I'm we've talked about this privately and on the radio at times. And like I said, I've been very skeptical but open-minded. I've interviewed hundreds of Bigfoot witnesses and thousands of UFO witnesses, and I've seen a lot of evidence out there. I've never personally seen a UFO or Bigfoot myself, something or anything I could not identify, which surprises a lot of people. But there's so much data that we've come across, and it's been so interesting over so many years to interview so many people who gave me those little details, and the people who were so reluctant to even tell me what they saw because it was so bizarre. But when you have so many people from widespread areas telling you these stories, there's something happening out there. And I'm telling you, as reluctant as I am to say it, I think more and more a lot of this phenomena is more than flesh and blood. For a lack of a better term, it's interdimensional. It's coming from another reality. And these things come into our physical reality under certain conditions. They can leave physical evidence, and then they're gone. They come and they go, like a lot of witnesses tell me.
Well, we've been we've been told by the flesh and blood people for years that we're crazy. But I'm telling you that there's just no other way to explain it. But quite frankly, you talk to me about it, you preach to the choir, but just so much evidence of something quite supernatural when it comes to Bigfoot. Yeah.
And, I've seen the change now in recent years.
Yeah.
I spoke down at the first cryptid con down in Kentucky last year. And I from what I remember, I think almost every person that spoke, every speaker was talking about the paranormal aspects of Bigfoot. And I'm getting such a huge response from emails from researchers and witnesses around the country, on the same thing. And they're beginning, I wrote about this 40-some years ago when I was uncovering. And back then, there was a lot more ridicule. Now it's being taken a lot more serious. A lot of people in the Bigfoot field, even a lot of, some well-known people, and they may not talk about it publicly, but they're getting the reports. They're very much aware of it. And I think more and more they're beginning to ask the same questions I am. Where's the bodies? It makes no sense. After so many years of sightings of something similar seen around the country and around the world, and yet we have so little really good physical evidence of no bodies, but everybody can't be wrong. There's something happening out there, and there's more to it than any of us understand at this point.
Now, this is something I wanted to ask you before. Why do you think that the number of people in this, as far as people that do actual research and investigation, is not as much as you would think in Pennsylvania? Even though this state is so huge, so much wilderness area, we really don't have a large number of investigators.
Well, it's hard to say. There was a lot more investigators back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And there was a lot of good investigators. Unfortunately, many of them are deceased. Many of them are up in age. Many of them are not in good physical condition anymore to get out. I'm somewhat limited. I'm up there now, too, and I get out as much as I can, but I can't do as much as I could 20 years ago. And but there's a lot of independent researchers out there. There's a lot of little groups showing up, investigating Bigfoot, and there's a tremendous number of paranormal and ghost hunting groups all over this area, all over the state. They're everywhere. And so there are people out there doing it. But there's just a lot of people aren't really that active. There's groups around. They're just not that active.
Yeah, I think if more people would actually not concentrate on one anomaly and kind of take it in whole, I think there'd be more success in understanding a lot what's going on. And you and I look at everything, and of course, there are the people that we associate with kind of look at every little type of anomaly that goes on in this state. And but of course, the people that doing the ghost, they do the ghost thing, and you got the Bigfoot people that just do the Bigfoot thing, and it kind of limited to that. But there are just so many aspects to the paranormal that I believe are connected, and of course, it keeps us busy. It's amazing. So, and of course, down here where I'm at, with this Adams, York County, and Lancaster County area, the southern part of the Susquehanna Valley, we've got so many type of things. Timmy Renner's been down there in his area, down there in the corner of southern York County, northern Maryland. He's been getting Bigfoot reports like crazy down there. There's just a lot of different things going on.
And that area's always had a history. I looked in the sightings back there in the 70s.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of activity. I've heard reports of sightings around, allegedly around Harrisburg and eastern PA in the last several years. I've heard reports from that whole general area. So they've been going on everywhere. But, talking about just looking into a particular phenomena, when I started this, Lon, I started this in 1959, and I've been out in the field since 1965, since the Kecksburg incident. And in those early days when I first started, while I was interested in UFOs and all kind of phenomena, I was getting a lot of calls on haunted houses long before most people got into the paranormal. And it wasn't the thing I was really interested in, but I was getting called out to investigate these reports. So that's how I started looking into them. And then I get involved in all these UFO cases and then all these Bigfoot reports. And then 73 comes around, and we had that massive UFO Bigfoot outbreak that went on for, months and months and months. And then things began to turn up at that time that I wasn't looking for. I mean, I wasn't out there trying to see cases with Bigfoot and UFOs seen together. I mean, these are what just turned up. And you got to remember, 1973 again, and it was a different time period. There's no cell phones. There's no internet. A lot of the calls initially were coming into the police departments, and they were referring a lot of the cases to us to follow up on, investigate. And it was just so amazing when you got out to these incidents, especially with the Bigfoot, and people were telling you, they're saying, for example, maybe this is just a coincidence, but when this thing's on our farm, for example, and we see it or we hear it screaming, within a short time later, these strange objects of lights appear on the farm.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. And then you began to find out from other people, well, we have had other weird things that go on too. We're having strange sounds, and we're having paranormal activity in our home on occasion. And the more the many years I've been doing this, 59 years this year, and you talk to so many people that tell you these little tidbits, these great little bits of information. You keep getting it in, and the more I know about the phenomena, and believe me, I don't think anybody has the answers. I don't think the government has the answers, and they're trying to figure it out too. But I think a lot of these various anomalies are somehow interconnected. They're all interrelated in some way, and I know part of it is energy related. Because I noticed years and years ago, and I talked about this years ago, and I see it more and more in recent years, that many close-range, low-level UFO sightings and many encounters with cryptids, so Bigfoot and the Thunderbirds and the Black Panthers and these other weird creatures, they commonly occur in the vicinity of high-energy sources. So once again, you got those gas wells and gas lines and high-tension power lines and power plants and radio towers and railroad tracks and water. There's energy involved in this phenomena. And, I just have no doubt about that whatsoever. I don't know what's going on. None of us have the answers, but there's a phenomenon out there that has a physical and a non-physical component to it, and this is why at times these things come into our physical reality. They're here for a short time. They can be physically solid at times, but in some cases they're not always completely solid. And as weird as it sounds, there's incidents where, for example, balls of light turn to creatures, and creatures turn to other creatures. I mean, it's so bizarre, but a lot of it you don't hear about because the people don't even want to talk about it.
Well, this is a phenomenon you and I have talked about in the last couple of years, these orbs, lights, energy associated with Bigfoot reports. Now, of course, you've been talking for years about the UFO activity, but I'm talking about, of course, orbs and lights inside the woods moving around or near the ground where these Bigfoot sightings are occurring at.
Exactly. And again, I started noticing this in 1972. And I can tell you where. This was only miles from my house, along what they call Humphrey Road, which was a lot of homes along this large, thick, wooded area. Everything had been normal. And then all of a sudden, we started getting reports from different people back in those days, calling me separately, said, I've lived here all my life. Something strange is going on in these woods. We're hearing these horrific screams and cries. We're hearing something bipedal heavy walking in the woods. We're seeing strange lights. Then people began to report, in one case, they saw this large, broad-shouldered, hairy creature chasing two dogs through the woods. And they reported these small, little, oversized fireflies, as golf ball-sized little round spheres of light within 10, 20 feet of their homes, right in the trees. And that's when I first began to notice it. It's been going on more and more during the 70s, and since that time, in a lot of these cases where there's a Bigfoot sighting, you get reports of these other strange objects or small, what I call mini UFOs, these little balls of light. But I've been talking about these mini UFOs for years. And they're very fascinating because some of these things, they're only a few inches to a foot in diameter. Some are just bright light sources of various colors. Some are transparent. Some are more metallic. In many cases, interestingly, even though they haven't hurt anybody, they come very close to the witnesses. I mean, within feet. And I have many instances where these things have entered people's homes, entered people's homes and cars through open windows. They glide around, they float around, and they go back out again. And one story I tell about a lot, some of my lectures, I remember a case up in northern PA, back in the 80s, I believe, and this woman's telling me she's in her kitchen cooking one day, had the window open, one of these little spheres comes in, and it's floating around the kitchen. So what's her response? She grabs her broom, starts hitting it. And she said it broke into two identical little spheres. They floated around and went back out the window and were gone.
Yeah, that's pretty typical. It's interesting when I get somebody will call me up and say, "Look, I've got these orbs in the house, outside. I don't know what they are. I mean, are they ghosts or whatever?" And I talk to them more and more, and then I invariably ask them, "Well, have you noticed any other activity?" And they'd say, "Well, what are you talking about?" "Well, have you heard anything? Have you seen anything unusual as well?" And, most times they will say, "Well, it's funny you bring that up because I have heard some strange sounds out in the yard at night or out in the woods or something that I've never heard before." Well, again, I mean, in my mind, I believe a lot of this is associated with each other.
Yeah, and as you brought up, in more recent years, not only in Pennsylvania, but around the country,
sure,
in areas where there's a lot of history of Bigfoot activity and Bigfoot encounters, like Fayette County, PA, other areas, Bigfoot researchers are out there looking for Bigfoot, looking for evidence of Bigfoot. They're not seeing Bigfoot, but they're reporting seeing these strange, multitudes of these firefly-type objects that don't move around, that don't act like normal fireflies, or these spheres of light, these little round spheres of light low on the ground or in the trees. We're hearing more and more reports like this from all over the country.
And, we're also getting a lot of reports in urban areas as well. Of course, I went up, I was involved with this Chicago thing last year with the flying humanoids, the winged humanoids. But, I have gotten reports, Harrisburg, inside York, of strange phenomena other than something that may be spiritual. So, I mean, people are becoming more aware, even in urban areas, of these anomalies.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've investigated many cases. Like I said, I've had recent incidents very close to, the Pittsburgh. I mean, I've had incidents the last years reported in downtown Pittsburgh.
Oh, yeah.
I've had incidents in past years I write about in some of my books where I remember one case was in one of the prominent areas of Pittsburgh, a suburb of Squirrel Hill, back a number of years ago, 3 o'clock in the morning, this large, solid elliptical object was hovering at an intersection. And the witnesses were very credible. They actually made an official police report on it. And these things are going on all the time. And they're citing these things hovering over our rivers and going in and out of the rivers over the years. It's just amazing, amazing reports. Probably one of the most interesting, I've worked on multitudes of very detailed UFO cases, not lights in the sky, large structured craft low to the ground.
Yeah. And
one of my favorite cases, because it was so well documented and there were so many people involved, was September 3rd, 1987, on busy Route 30, crosses what was then the Green Gate Mall, only miles from where I live, and there were a multitude of eyewitnesses, including law enforcement people, and it was early that evening when they see this approximately 300-foot-long, huge metallic cigar-shaped object with multiple lights on it, completely silent, only about 300 feet off the ground, moving across the road, and across Route 30, the opposite side was a power substation, and here's this huge object with multiple lights on it, making those sounds, moving horizontally in the sky, and as it gets near the power substation in the sky, it turns vertical, and all the power in the area goes out.
Yeah.
And when the engineers went to investigate, they found that all three of the master fuses in the circuit had been blown. Apparently, they had never experienced anything like that before. And I mean, that's just an example of your energy connection with the phenomena.
Well, you look at the Todd Cease case. I mean, there's an example of that power line on top of the ridge where this craft was seen, and we've had other sightings on that ridge as well. But it's a huge power line there, and in his instance, I just think he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and just happened to be there. And it does seem that these power lines, and you say these power stations, are accessed by these craft.
Yeah, and again, with so many of these UFO reports, it's not just the cryptids, but it's also the UFO phenomena. Some of these incidents with these UFOs, whatever they might be, and of course we can theorize for years. Back when I started this back years ago, everybody thought we're dealing with extraterrestrial spacecraft, and maybe a small percentage of them might be. But the more I know about the phenomena, it may well be we're dealing again with something that's from another reality, another dimension. We just don't know. I mean, we had an incident. We've been getting a number of reports in recent weeks, even daylight, of a lot of UFO activity up in that area where I believe you guys had a dogman sighting up in Cambria County.
Right.
Okay, and I'm waiting. I've been in touch with some of the witnesses up there. I believe there's been some pictures taken. I'm waiting to see. And but anyhow, and I'm just trying to see. This was just in the last couple of weeks, and this would have been in September, and this was in daylight. And one witness reported seeing this object that I'm trying to find a report here. This object in the daylight. It was metallic looking, and I believe elongated, and began to make erratic movements in the sky. This was early in the morning, 9:30 in the morning, and it was a solid appearing object that suddenly became translucent. Then it reappeared again, became solid, then it faded out, and the witness said it was like it became invisible, it was gone. And over the years, I've talked to many witnesses, even in daylight, who have observed UFOs at close range. And these things suddenly appeared and disappeared. They physically changed physical form. They were here and they were gone. So, what are we dealing with?
That's the big question. So, Stan, how can people get a hold of you if they've got a report? Tell us where you can get your books, and what events have you got coming up in the near future?
Okay, well, the website is stangordon.info, I-N-F-O, and I'll keep updating. There's some interesting reports in there from recent weeks and months. There's a lot of activity still going on around the area from reports we're getting. They have contact information on my website. Phone number and email is paufo@comcast.net. There's still a bunch of events coming up in the rest of the year, so they can go look under upcoming events. I'll be next weekend, a week from tomorrow, Saturday and Sunday, I'll be down in Monroeville outside of Pittsburgh for the big Mind, Body, and Spirit Expo at the Monroeville Convention Center. I'll be speaking there on Saturday, I believe it's at 4 o'clock. And there's a lot of other events coming up, some very good ones through October. So then go to my website, look under 2018 upcoming events and scroll down. There's a lot of events being planned already for next year in Pennsylvania. And, of course, we have Eric's event up there, the Bigfoot Camping Adventure. And I believe it's May 31st, June 1st, and June 2nd of next year. And I know they have a lot of well-known names in Bigfoot field from around the country coming in. I will be a speaker, and I know you're going to be there, so it should be a lot of fun. And my books are all available on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com as well.
Well, Stan, thanks for joining me. I think we're in for a busy rest of the year, and most likely into 2019.
I think we will be, and hopefully it'll be that next call that gives us the evidence that once and for all lets us prove something out there.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Stan.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Mm-hmm. Now, before I go, allow me to leave this with the listeners. Actor, comedian, and paranormal advocate Dan Aykroyd has quoted, "Everyone fears the cut of the blade. It doesn't matter after that. I know the spirit survives as there is so much evidence of survival of the personality in the afterlife." Now, that being said, I personally believe that the life force does not end when we die. Death is the beginning of the journey into the world of light and love. It's a transition from the physical to the spiritual. Where fear ends, renewal begins. I want to thank everybody for listening to the show. Good night and have a great weekend.